In a quiet farmer's market in rural America, a confrontation is about to unfold that will shake a small town to its core. When a ruthless biker gang sets their sights on the local vendors, they think they're dealing with just another aging farmer. They couldn't be more wrong. John Mason isn't your typical produce seller. For 20 years, he was one of the most lethal force Recon Marines in Corps history, leading missions in the world's deadliest combat zones. His call sign was Ghost, a shadow that moved unseen and struck without mercy. This is not just another story about standing up to bullies. This is about how the most feared motorcycle gang in 3 states learned the hard way that some warriors never lose their edge. When they threatened his community, they didn't realize they were awakening a sleeping giant. What follows is the story of how one former Marine transformed a vulnerable farmer's market into an impenetrable fortress, using nothing but decades of combat experience, the tactical genius that made him a legend, and a community willing to fight back. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow we've got something extra special for you. The morning frost crunched under John Mason's boots as he walked the perimeter of Peterson's farmer's market. Dawn was breaking over the hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. His German shepherd Max trotted beside him, alert and watchful as always. At 55, John still moved with the fluid grace of a much younger man, his eyes constantly scanning his surroundings, old habits that had kept him alive through 2 decades of combat. His weathered hands, marked by years of working the soil, reached down to inspect fresh tire tracks in the gravel. These weren't from the usual market vendors' trucks or local vehicles. The deep, distinctive patterns told a different story. Heavy motorcycles, probably custom bikes, had been here recently. "Something's not right, boy," John muttered, studying the direction of the tracks. Max growled softly in agreement, his ears perking forward. The German shepherd had been through 3 combat tours with John, and like his master, he never truly left that vigilant state behind. Sarah Bennett's weathered pickup rattled into the parking lot, breaking the morning quiet. She pulled up beside John, her usually cheerful face drawn with worry. "John, thank God you're out here. Did you hear about the Wilsons?" John straightened, brushing dirt from his jeans. 20 years of farming had taught him patience, but the tension in Sarah's voice triggered old instincts. "What about them?" "They're gone. Just packed up and left last night. No warning, nothing. But this morning I saw men at their market stall. Big bikes, guys who don't look like they're from around here, the kind that make you want to cross the street when you see them coming." "Steel wolves," John's voice was calm, but his mind was already racing through scenarios, analyzing threats, forming plans. The name had been circulating in local law enforcement channels for months. Sarah nodded, her hands gripping her steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. "That's what they're saying in town. They've been moving up from the south, taking over markets one by one. Those who don't pay protection money, well, they find other ways to persuade them. Strange accidents, mysterious fires, people getting hurt." John's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Have they approached you yet?" "No, but Thompson's stall went last week. Same thing. Mysterious demands, too much pressure to refuse. Those who stick around say they're using the markets for drug distribution, the timing of deliveries, the constant traffic. It all makes perfect sense now." "Makes sense," John said, his tactical mind already mapping it out. Isolated locations, legitimate cover for vehicle traffic, established vendor networks, perfect front for moving product without attracting attention. Sarah leaned out her window, lowering her voice, though no one else was within earshot. "John, these aren't ordinary criminals. They're organized, well-funded. The sheriff's out of his depth, and nobody else will stand up to them. They've got connections. Every time someone tries to fight back, charges get dropped, evidence disappears." John patted the side of her truck, a gesture meant to reassure. "Don't worry about me, Sarah. I've dealt with worse." Much worse, he thought, remembering nights in places that didn't exist on any map, facing enemies that would never appear in any report. As Sarah drove away to set up her flower stand, John whistled for Max and headed toward his own stall. The simple wooden structure looked like all the others: weathered boards, hand-painted sign, bins ready for the day's produce. But beneath the ordinary farm equipment and tools lay something else, a hidden compartment he'd installed when he first bought the property. Old paranoia, his friends had called it. John called it preparation. He lifted the false bottom, revealing a cache of equipment he'd hoped never to use again: tactical gear, communications equipment, everything he'd need if things went south. He'd spent his entire career planning for worst-case scenarios. This wouldn't be any different. John's phone buzzed, a text from an old contact in law enforcement. "Steel wolves moving hard and fast. 7 markets taken in the last month. Watch your back. Pattern suggests coordinated expansion, possible cartel connections." The sound of motorcycles on the main road caught his attention. Through his stand's window, he watched 3 heavily customized Harleys roll past, moving slowly, too slowly. Reconnaissance, marking the next target. Their leather cuts bore the Steel Wolves patch, but John's trained eye caught other details: the way they moved, their formation, the subtle hand signals. These weren't just thugs on bikes, they had training. "Max," John said, scratching his dog's ears. They don't know who they're dealing with. The German shepherd's ears perked up at his master's tone, recognizing the shift from farmer to warrior. He spent the morning making calls to old teammates, men who'd fought beside him in places that didn't officially exist, carrying out missions that would never see the light of day. Each call followed the same pattern: a moment of surprise, a quick understanding of the situation, and immediate agreement to help. "Martinez, it's Ghost. Remember that favor you owe me? Time to pay up." By afternoon, his plans were in motion. 4 of his old team members were en route. Martinez Shadow Rodriguez, their infiltration specialist, whose ability to disappear in plain sight had saved their lives more times than they could count. Thompson Echo Williams, their sniper who could put 3 rounds through the same hole at 1,000 yards. Chen Cypher Lee, communications expert who could crack any system ever built. And Jackson Doc Miller, their medic who'd performed miracles under fire. Together they'd face down warlords, terrorists, and armies. A biker gang wouldn't know what hit them. The sun climbed higher as John meticulously arranged his produce display. To any observer, he was just another vendor preparing for market day. But his eyes never stopped moving, cataloging threats, planning responses, identifying fields of fire. Every sight line, every approach, every potential cover spot was noted and evaluated. The Steel Wolves thought they were targeting an old farmer's market stand. Instead, they were walking into a kill zone designed by one of the most experienced force recon operators in Marine Corps' history. The first rumble of motorcycles announced their arrival. John straightened his back, adjusted his worn baseball cap, and prepared to play the role of a simple farmer. Let them think he was harmless. Let them underestimate him. It was a mistake they would only make once. Greater than. The roar of motorcycles shattered the morning peace as 5 heavily customized Harleys thundered into the market square. Their chrome gleamed in the early sunlight, engines deliberately loud enough to set teeth on edge. Their leader, a mountain of a man known as Bull, dismounted with practiced confidence. His leather cut displayed the Steel Wolves patch, along with markers identifying him as chapter president. 2 prospect members immediately took flanking positions, while the others spread through the market with military precision that caught John's attention. From behind his produce display, John continued arranging his tomatoes, every movement measured and calm. Through peripheral vision, he conducted a threat assessment: bulges under leather jackets indicating concealed weapons, boot knives visible on at least 3 members, and the distinctive outline of a sawed-off shotgun poorly hidden in one of the saddlebags. Amateur work. They weren't expecting serious resistance. "Nice setup you got here," Bull's voice carried across the market like a thunderclap. He stopped at Sarah's flower stand first, picking up a rose with exaggerated care in his massive hands. "Be a shame if anything happened to all these pretty things. Market can be dangerous these days." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she rang up the flower. Bull dropped a 20 on her counter, the gesture deliberately slow and threatening. "Keep the change, sweetheart. Consider it a down payment on your market dues. We'll discuss proper rates later." John's fingers tightened imperceptibly on the tomato he was holding. 20 years of combat experience screamed at him to act, to neutralize the threat before it could escalate. But the discipline that had kept him alive through countless operations held him in check. Not yet. Need more intel, need to understand their full operation. Max lay quietly under John's table, but his muscles were tense, ready. The German Shepherd had been through enough combat situations to know when trouble was brewing. One subtle hand signal from John kept him still, watching. Bull's attention shifted to John's stand, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. The biker leader moved with the confidence of someone used to intimidating others, but John noted the subtle signs of formal training in his movement. Military background, probably infantry, maybe special forces. Organic, right? Bull picked up an apple, studied it with theatrical consideration. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Must be expensive growing everything natural like. Lots of overhead, I bet." "Takes time," John replied, voice neutral but alert. "Care, attention to detail." "Details are important," Bull agreed, deliberately dropping the apple. It rolled off the table, bruising on impact. Like insurance, protection. Things happen in markets these days. Accidents, fires, equipment failures. John met Bull's gaze. For just a moment, the mask of simple farmer slipped, and Bull caught a glimpse of something else, something that made the biker leader blink and take half a step back before catching himself. It was the look of a predator, not prey. "You threatening me?" John's voice carried the quiet authority that had once commanded elite reconnaissance teams in the world's deadliest combat zones. Bull recovered quickly, but John noted the flash of uncertainty in his eyes. Something in John's demeanor had triggered a warning signal. "Just having a friendly business discussion. We'll be around to talk numbers later. Think carefully about your position here." As the bikers mounted up, engines roaring to life, John's phone vibrated with a message from Martinez. 2 hours out, team assembled, full gear. John's reply was brief. "Make it 1. Company's already knocking." Inside his stand, John activated his real security system, installed months ago when he first heard rumors of the steel wolves moving north. Cameras hidden in market fixtures covered every approach. Motion sensors monitored the perimeter. Everything fed into a secure network Chen had designed during their last deployment together. He pulled up satellite images of the area on a hidden tablet, marking known steel wolves locations. 3 warehouses on the outskirts of town, a clubhouse masquerading as a bar, multiple safe houses identified through careful observation. His market position was their missing piece. The location provided perfect cover for distribution, with regular traffic patterns and legitimate business activities to mask their operations. Sarah approached cautiously after the bikers left. "John, they were at your place, weren't they? I saw the bikes. You can't stand up to them alone." "Just a friendly business proposition," John replied, checking his burner phone for updates from his team. "Nothing to worry about." "Don't lie to me. Thompson tried standing up to them last month. Next day his truck's brakes failed on Dead Man's Curve. No witnesses, no evidence, but everyone knows what happened." John's voice softened. "Sarah, listen carefully. Next few days, stay with your sister in Pine Ridge. Don't tell anyone you're going. Don't use your phone. Just disappear for a while." John, what are you planning? These aren't just thugs. They've got real connections, real power. Better you don't know. Just trust me. I've handled worse. After she left, John descended into his stand's hidden compartment, a space that would have impressed his old commanding officer. The room was exactly as he'd left it, weapons and equipment maintained and ready. He began checking each piece methodically, muscle memory taking over, as he field-stripped and reassembled his modified gear. Max whined softly from above, his keen ears picking up approaching vehicles. John paused, listening. Different engine sound, local sheriff's department. He checked the cameras. Deputy Mike Hayes, young and out of his depth, but honest. John met him at the stand entrance. Hayes looked nervous, shuffling his feet, unable to meet John's steady gaze. "Mr. Mason, heard you had visitors today. Word travels fast." "Listen, about the others. Thompson, the Wilsons. We know what happened, but we can't prove anything. These people, they're connected. Evidence disappears, witnesses change their stories. Even the state police won't touch them." John nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "And you're here to advise me to take their deal?" Hayes looked ashamed, his badge suddenly seeming very heavy. "They own half the county already. Fighting them. It's suicide. Just be careful, okay?" As Hayes drove away, John's phone chimed again. Chen's message was encrypted but clear. "Systems online. Perimeter secure. Intercepted communications suggest they're planning something big. Tonight." John smiled grimly. Perfect. Let them come in force. Let them think they had the advantage. 20 years of combat experience had taught him that overconfident enemies made mistakes. He'd learned long ago how to turn those mistakes into opportunities. He had 1 hour until his team arrived. 1 hour to turn his market stand into a fortress. The Steel Wolves were about to learn why Force Recon Marines were considered among the deadliest fighters in the world. Greater than. The sound of engines echoing through the market caught Wade's attention. 3 vehicles approaching from different directions, his team using old tactics to avoid detection. Martinez's black pickup arrived first, followed by Thompson's weathered Jeep, then Chen and Doc in separate civilian vehicles, all covered in road dust from backroad driving. John met them behind his stand, away from prying eyes. 20 years melted away as his old team assembled, their movements still synchronized after countless missions. Martinez carried his gear in a beaten construction equipment case. Thompson's rifle was broken down in what looked like fishing gear, Chen's communications equipment disguised as farm electronics. "Just like old times," Martinez grinned, though his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. "Though usually we had government backing." "Government would just slow us down," Thompson replied, already examining the market's layout. "Nice setup, Ghost. Good sight lines, multiple escape routes. You weren't kidding about being ready." John spread detailed satellite images across his workbench. "Steel Wolves have been systematic, taking markets one by one, establishing distribution routes. They're not just running protection rackets, they're setting up a permanent operation." Chen connected his laptop, bringing up intercepted communications. "They're professional, ex-military in their ranks, mostly Army Special Forces, but they're sloppy with security, overconfident." His fingers flew across the keyboard, displaying surveillance footage from hidden cameras. "How many are we dealing with?" Doc asked, organizing his medical supplies with practiced efficiency. "Main force is 30 members," John pointed to marked locations. 2 separate groups. First team handles intimidation, the muscle. Second team's their professionals, actual combat experience. They've got heavy weapons, body armor, probably air support from what I've intercepted. Thompson examined the terrain through his stand's window. "Kill zones are perfect. Natural bottleneck here, high ground advantage. We can funnel them right where we want them." "They'll come in force," John warned. "No more pretense of being businessmen. This needs to end permanently, not just here but their entire operation in the county." The team sobered, recognizing his tone. It was the voice that had led them through impossible missions, that had brought them all home alive when odds said otherwise. "Why'd you really come?" John asked, looking at each man. "You could have stayed retired, stayed safe." Doc spoke first, checking his medical supplies. "Remember that village in Afghanistan? After the Taliban went through? Some fights need fighting." "Cartel took my cousin's farm in Texas," Martinez added, his voice hard. "By the time anyone could do anything, it was too late. Not happening again. Not here." Thompson just shrugged, but his eyes were steel. "You called. That's enough." Chen looked up from his computer. "They're moving faster than we thought. Intercepted orders. Main force mobilizing for tonight. No warning, no negotiation. They're coming to take the market and send a message." "Perfect," John smiled grimly. "Let's give them a message of their own." They spent the next hour fortifying key positions. Martinez rigged approaches with sensors that could tip a motorcycle at 30 miles per hour. Thompson set up 3 different sniper positions, each covering a different angle. Chen established a command center in John's hidden basement, linking their communications and surveillance. "Remember Kandahar?" Thompson asked as they worked. "That night raid that went sideways when the whole city lit up?" "Never saw so much firepower in my life," Martinez chuckled, "until Ghost called an audible." "Still don't know how you knew that would work," Doc added, checking his trauma kit. "Simple," John said, verifying ammunition stores. "People get predictable when they think they have the advantage. Steel wolves are the same, used to civilians, used to easy victories. They won't be ready for what's coming." Chen's voice crackled over their earpieces. "Movement at the Wilson place. They're assembling their force. Thermal shows at least 20 bikes." "They're not subtle anymore," Martinez observed, finishing his last trap. "Coming in like an army." "Good," John replied. "Means they're scared. Scared men make mistakes." The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the market. John stood with his team, watching day fade to dusk. They were no longer young men, but age had brought something else: experience, patience, the kind of wisdom that only comes from decades of combat. "Remember," John said, his voice carrying the weight of command, "we're not just defending a market. We're defending every family in this county, every person these bastards would victimize. We do this right. We do it clean, and we do it permanent." Max's ears perked up as distant motorcycle engines echoed through the growing darkness. The steel wolves were coming, bringing everything they had. They thought they were preparing to raid an old farmer's market. Instead, they were walking into a trap laid by some of the most experienced combat veterans alive. "Radio check," John ordered, receiving crisp acknowledgments from his team. "Remember, let them get comfortable. Let them think they have the advantage. Then we show them what real soldiers can do." The Montana sun disappeared behind the mountains, plunging the market into darkness. But darkness had always been their ally. In the shadows, John wasn't a farmer anymore. He was Ghost again, the shadow that hunted other shadows. And he was about to remind the Steel Wolves why that name had once struck fear into the hearts of far more dangerous men than them. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when John Mason pulled his weathered pickup into the Steel Wolves' compound. No subterfuge, no tactical approach, just a direct drive up to their front gate. Max sat alert in the passenger seat, his ears forward, body tense with anticipation. The German shepherd could sense the shift in his master's demeanor, the transition from farmer to warrior that was becoming more pronounced with each passing day. 2 prospects manning the gate straightened as John's truck approached, their hands instinctively moving toward concealed weapons. The compound itself was a converted warehouse, its exterior deliberately shabby to avoid attention, but John's trained eye caught the professional security setup. Cameras with overlapping fields of fire, reinforced doors, tactical positions on the roof. These weren't amateur thugs playing at being tough. This was a military-grade operation. "Private property," one of the prospects called out, trying to sound authoritative. "Turn around." John stepped out of his truck, leaving Max inside with a hand signal to stay. He moved with fluid grace, each step measured and precise. He wore his usual farming clothes, worn jeans, flannel shirt, work boots. But something in his bearing made both prospects take an unconscious step back. "Here to see Bull," John said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded elite reconnaissance teams. "Tell him John Mason wants to talk." The prospects exchanged glances, uncertainty clear in their body language. John's direct approach had thrown them off script. One made a quick call on his radio, speaking in hushed tones. After a moment of tense silence, the gate buzzed open. "Follow the path," the first prospect said, trying to recover his tough guy demeanor. "Any funny business, you won't make it 10 feet. John allowed himself a small smile. "Son, if I wanted trouble, you'd already be down." The walk to the main building took him past parked motorcycles and suspicious looks from Steel Wolves members. John cataloged everything: numbers, weapons, positions. These men had training, but they'd grown soft, comfortable in their dominance over civilians. They'd forgotten what real combat operators looked like. Bull met him in what had once been the warehouse's office, now converted into a clubhouse. The gang leader's massive frame filled a leather chair behind a desk that seemed too small for him. Two enforcers flanked him, their stances revealing military background, Army, John guessed, maybe Rangers or Special Forces. "Bold move, coming here alone," Bull said, his voice a controlled rumble. "Either very brave or very stupid." "Just efficient," John replied, remaining standing. "Thought we should have a proper conversation about the market's future." Bull leaned forward, his attempt at intimidation obvious. "Future's simple. You pay, we protect. You resist, bad things happen, not complicated." "Actually, it is." John's voice remained calm, but something in his tone made Bull's enforcers shift uneasily. "I'm here to give you a chance. One chance. Take your operation elsewhere. Leave the county. Leave the markets alone. Do that, we all go home happy." Laughter erupted from Bull and his men, but it didn't reach their eyes. Something about John's demeanor was setting off warning bells in their combat-trained instincts. "You threatening me?" Bull stood, using his height to loom over the desk. "In my own house? Do you have any idea what we do to people who—" "3 seconds," John interrupted. "What?" "3 seconds from when I walked in. That's how long it would take me to put all 3 of you down. Your right-hand man favors his left side. Old injury, probably Afghanistan. Your other guy's holster is worn, catches on the draw. And you, Bull, you telegraph your moves like a rookie." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Bull's enforcers had their hands on their weapons, but John hadn't moved, hadn't changed his relaxed stance. "You're good at intimidating farmers," John continued, "good at scaring people who've never seen real violence, but you're not ready for what I bring to the table." "Who the fuck are you?" Bull's voice had lost its confident edge. "Just a farmer." John turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For now, but push this and you'll find out exactly what I used to be. Ask around about Force Recon. Ask about the ones they called ghosts." He left them in stunned silence, walking unhurried back to his truck. Max greeted him with a soft whine, picking up on the controlled tension in his master's movements. The drive back to the market gave John time to think. He knew his warning wouldn't be enough. Men like Bull were too invested in their power to back down easily, but it was necessary, this formal declaration of intent. In his years with Force Recon, John had learned the value of clear communication before action. Sarah caught up with him as he was setting up his produce display. "John, people are talking. They say you walked right into the wolves' den. Are you crazy?" "Had to give them a choice," John replied, arranging tomatoes with mechanical precision. "Had to make it official." "And if they don't take it?" John's hands paused briefly over his produce. "Then they've made their choice. and I've made mine." That afternoon, his phone buzzed with messages from old contacts. Word was spreading through veteran circles about the confrontation. The Steel Wolves were calling in favors, mobilizing resources. They'd recognized the threat in John's warning, even if they didn't yet understand its full implications. As dusk settled over the market, John began his real work. Surveillance equipment deployed, escape routes mapped, contingencies planned. The Steel Wolves had made their reputation through violence and intimidation, but they'd never faced anyone who'd been trained to turn violence into an art form. In his hidden command center, John reviewed satellite imagery of Steel Wolves' positions. They were mobilizing, calling in reinforcements from other chapters. They thought numbers would give them the advantage. But John had spent his career teaching force recon teams how to take down larger forces. The more men they brought, the more targets they provided. "Your move," he muttered, watching motorcycle convoys converge on the county. The Steel Wolves were about to learn why Force Recon Marines were considered the deadliest hunters in the world. Behind him, Max let out a low growl. The German Shepherd sensed it too, the calm before the storm, the gathering tension in the air. War was coming to the market, whether the Steel Wolves knew it or not. And John Mason, the farmer they'd mistaken for easy prey, would show them exactly why some men earned the name Ghost. The pre-dawn air was thick with tension when Sarah's scream shattered the morning quiet at Peterson's farmer's market. John Mason was already in motion before the sound died away, muscle memory and combat instincts taking over as he sprinted from his stand. Max bolted ahead, the German Shepherd's powerful legs eating up the distance between them and Sarah's flower stall. 3 Steel Wolves members had Sarah cornered against her pickup truck. Their leather cuts marked them as prospects, new recruits eager to prove themselves. But there was nothing amateur about their positioning or the way they held their weapons. These weren't street thugs, they had military training. "Last chance to pay up," the leader was saying, pressing Sarah against her truck door. "Bull's patience is running thin." John assessed the situation in fragments of seconds, just as he'd been trained. 3 targets, 2 with visible weapons, brass knuckles and a knife. The third hanging back, hand inside his jacket, probably a firearm. Sarah's eyes were wide with fear, but she wasn't panicking. Good girl. "Gentlemen," John's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I believe the lady said no." The prospects turned, startled by his silent approach. Their leader recovered quickly, cocky grin spreading across his face. "Walk away, old man. This is business." "Last warning," John replied, his stance relaxed but balanced. "Leave, now." The prospect with the knife stepped forward, blade glinting in the early morning light. Or what? What happened next was so fast that Sarah would later say it looked like a dance. The knife wielder lunged, blade slashing through empty air where John had been a heartbeat before. John's counter was devastatingly efficient, one fluid motion that caught the prospect's wrist, twisted, and sent him sprawling with a dislocated shoulder. The second prospect charged in with his brass knuckles, only to meet John's elbow in a precisely targeted strike that dropped him gasping to his knees. The third prospect managed to clear his jacket, revealing a compact pistol, but Max was already in motion. The German Shepherd hit him like a furry missile, powerful jaws clamping down on his gun arm with trained precision. 5 seconds. That's all it had taken. 3 trained fighters lay groaning on the ground, disarmed and neutralized by what they'd dismissed as a simple farmer. "Sarah," John's voice was calm, controlled. "Get in your truck and drive to my place. Max will go with you." She nodded, hands shaking slightly as she fumbled with her keys. Max released his grip on the prospect's arm at John's whistle, moving to Sarah's side with military precision. The dog's training was evident in every movement. This wasn't his first combat situation. As Sarah's truck pulled away, John turned his attention back to the fallen prospects. His voice, when he spoke, carried the cold authority that had once commanded elite reconnaissance teams in the world's deadliest combat zones. "Tell Bull this is strike one. There won't be a strike three." Word of the confrontation spread through the market like wildfire. By noon, everyone had heard how John Mason had taken down 3 armed men in seconds. The stories grew with each telling. Some said he'd moved like a ghost. Others swore he'd barely touched them before they fell. Martinez called that afternoon, his voice tight with concern. "Ghost, satellite shows major movement. Steel wolves are pulling in heavy hitters from 3 states. Whatever you did, you got their attention." "Good," John replied, checking the feed from his hidden cameras. "Let them come. Time they learned what real operators can do." That evening, John walked the market's perimeter, noting changes in the Steel Wolves' patrol patterns. They were moving in groups now, hands never far from weapons. Fear had replaced their earlier arrogance. They'd finally realized they weren't dealing with an ordinary farmer, but it wasn't enough. John knew from experience that organizations like the Steel Wolves only understood one language: decisive, overwhelming force. The morning's confrontation had been a warning shot, a demonstration of capabilities. The real war was just beginning. In his hidden command center, John reviewed tactical data. The Steel Wolves were mobilizing everything they had: weapons, men, resources. They thought numbers and firepower would give them the advantage. But John had spent his career teaching Force Recon teams how to turn superior numbers into a liability. His phone buzzed with a message from Thompson. "Got eyes on their supply routes. They're bringing in serious hardware, military-grade stuff?" "Expected that," John texted back. "Let them arm up. More weapons just means more evidence when this is done." Sarah called that evening from his farm's safe room. "John, they're saying things about what you did, about who you must be, the way you moved." "Best not to ask questions you don't want answered," John replied gently. "Just know you're safe now. They won't touch you again." After hanging up, John stood at his stand's window, watching darkness settle over the market. The Steel Wolves had made a critical mistake. They'd confused his patience for weakness, his restraint for fear. They'd pushed until they found his line in the sand, then crossed it without hesitation. Now they would learn why some of the world's deadliest combat zones still whispered stories about the ghost. Why even hardened warriors grew quiet at the mention of Force Recon's shadow operations. The Steel Wolves had wanted to play at being soldiers. John would show them what real combat looked like. In the distance, motorcycle engines rumbled like thunder. The Steel Wolves were gathering their forces, preparing to respond to the morning's humiliation. They thought they were preparing for a show of force. Instead, they were walking into a trap laid by one of the most experienced combat operators alive. John checked his weapons one last time, muscle memory guiding his hands through familiar motions. The market would become a battlefield, but battlefields had been his home long before he became a farmer. The Steel Wolves were about to learn the difference between thugs who practiced violence and a man who had mastered it. "Come on, then," he muttered into the gathering darkness. "Let's see what you've got." John Mason crouched in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse, his night vision goggles revealing the Steel Wolves' compound in crisp detail. Max lay silent beside him, the German shepherd's training evident in his perfect stillness. They'd been observing the compound for 6 hours, tracking movement patterns, identifying key personnel. The gang's response to yesterday's confrontation had been predictable: increased security, more armed patrols, a show of force meant to intimidate. But to John's trained eye, their movements revealed weaknesses. Their overconfidence had made them sloppy. Through his encrypted comlink, Chen's voice crackled softly. "Ghost, thermal imaging shows 23 heat signatures inside. They're rotating guards every 2 hours, but there's a 3-minute gap in coverage on the east side." "Copy that," John whispered, making notes on his tactical pad. Any word on their supply chains? Multiple routes identified, Chen replied. They're moving product through 3 different markets now, using vendor vehicles for cover. Clever setup, if you don't know what to look for. John had spent the past week mapping the Steel Wolves operation. What he'd found was concerning. This wasn't just a local gang running protection rackets. Their organization had military precision, cartel connections, and political protection. They'd chosen the farmers' markets carefully, using the regular flow of vehicles and cash transactions to mask their drug distribution network. Movement at the compound's gate caught his attention. A convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled in, their windows tinted well beyond legal limits. John adjusted his camera, capturing high-resolution images of the vehicles and their occupants. Chen, running plates now, these aren't local players. The response came quickly. Vehicles registered to shell companies in Nevada, similar pattern to known cartel front operations. They're scaling up, Ghost. John watched as men in expensive suits emerged from the SUVs. They're bearing unmistakably military. Private security contractors, probably ex-special forces. The Steel Wolves were bringing in professional muscle. Martinez, you seeing this? John switched channels. Affirmative. Martinez's voice was grim. Recognize 2 of them. Blackwater alumni. These guys aren't street thugs. They're serious operators. Good, John replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Means they'll understand what's coming. He spent another hour observing the compound, documenting security patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. The Steel Wolves had transformed the warehouse into a fortress, but John had breached better defenses in his career. Every fortress had weak points, if you knew where to look. Back at his farm's command center, John compiled his intelligence into a comprehensive tactical assessment. Satellite imagery showed the full scope of the Steel Wolves operation. Multiple safe houses, storage facilities, and distribution points across 3 counties. They'd built their network carefully, using legitimate businesses as cover. Thompson, John activated his secure line. What did you find at their secondary location? Professional setup, Thompson reported. They're using a trucking company as a front. Regular routes between markets, perfect cover for moving product. But they got sloppy with their paperwork. Found discrepancies in their shipping manifests, way more trips than their legitimate business could justify. John added the information to his growing database. The picture it painted was troubling. The Steel Wolves weren't just criminals, they were an advance force, preparing the ground for something bigger. Their market takeovers followed a pattern he'd seen before in combat zones, systematic control of key distribution points, establishment of secure routes, infiltration of local infrastructure. Ghost, Chen's voice interrupted his analysis. Just intercepted some encrypted communications. They're planning something big. Multiple chapters converging on the county. Whatever they're moving, it's significant enough to bring in heavy hitters from across the region. John studied the tactical display, watching red dots multiply across the map as more Steel Wolves units moved into position. They thought they were preparing for a show of force. Instead, they were walking into a carefully prepared kill zone. Keep monitoring, he ordered. I want every route mapped, every safe house identified. When we move, we take them all down at once. No warning, no escape routes. As night fell, John reviewed his intelligence one final time. The Steel Wolves had built their operation on intimidation and violence, but they'd never faced an opponent who understood asymmetric warfare, who'd spent decades teaching Force Recon's finest how to dismantle larger, better-equipped forces. His phone buzzed, a message from Sarah. John, they're watching your stand. Men I don't recognize, not the usual thugs. Expected that, he texted back. Stay clear of the market tomorrow. Things are about to get interesting. In his command center, surrounded by tactical displays and surveillance feeds, John felt the familiar calm that preceded combat. The Steel Wolves thought they were hunters, but they'd never encountered a true predator. They were about to learn why Force Recon operators were considered the deadliest hunters in the world. All units, he broadcast on his secure channel. Intel gathering phase complete. Tomorrow we move to active operations. These boys want to play soldier. Let's show them what real warriors can do. The responses came back crisp and professional, his old team acknowledging orders just like they had in combat zones across the globe. The Steel Wolves had no idea they weren't dealing with a simple farmer anymore. They were about to face a force that had taken down warlords, dismantled terrorist cells, and disappeared into the shadows before their targets knew what hit them. "Time to hunt," John whispered, Max's ears perking up at his master's tone. Tomorrow, the war would begin in earnest, and the Steel Wolves would learn why some men earned the name Ghost. The market vendors gathered in John Mason's barn just before dawn, their faces a mix of determination and fear. 20 people had come despite the risks, farmers, craftsmen, small business owners who'd built their lives around the market. They sat on hay bales and wooden crates, watching as John laid out the situation. "Steel Wolves aren't just criminals," John explained, his voice carrying the authority of command. "They're an organized force using our markets as distribution points. They've done this before, taking over communities one piece at a time until nothing's left to resist." Sarah stood near the front, her arms crossed. The bruises from yesterday's confrontation were still visible on her wrist. "We've called the police, the FBI, everyone. Nobody helps." "Because they're protected," John clicked through satellite images on a mounted screen. "They've got connections in law enforcement, politics, but they've never faced what we're about to bring." Thompson emerged from the shadows, his sniper's stillness drawing immediate attention. "Ghost, John, has a plan, but we need your help to execute it." The vendors exchanged glances. They'd all heard rumors about John's military past, whispers about what happened to the Steel Wolves prospects who'd attacked Sarah. But this was different. This was war. "What can we do?" Tom Wilson asked, a third-generation farmer whose stand had been vandalized last week. "We're not soldiers." "No," John agreed. "You're something better. You're locals. You know every road, every building, every pattern of life in this county. That's intelligence we can't buy." Martinez stepped forward, spreading maps across a central table. "We need eyes everywhere, safe houses for threatened vendors, communication networks they can't monitor." The initial hesitation began to fade as John outlined his strategy. These weren't just defensive measures. This was a coordinated campaign to reclaim their community. Every vendor had a role to play. Every piece of local knowledge could tip the balance. "Susan," John nodded to the retired schoolteacher who ran the honey stand, "your brother still work at the county records office?" She nodded, understanding dawning. "Every property transaction, every business license, he sees it all." "Perfect. We need to know every property they've bought, every front company they're using." The planning continued through the morning. Each vendor brought something unique: knowledge of back roads, relationships with local officials, connections throughout the community. What had started as a group of scared individuals was transforming into a coordinated resistance. Sheriff Hayes arrived as the sun crested the hills, looking nervous but determined. "This is crazy, John. They've got an army." "No," John's voice carried absolute certainty. "They've got thugs playing at being soldiers. We've got a community fighting for its home." The sheriff studied the tactical displays, the organized planning, the determined faces of the vendors. "County's been looking the other way because we thought we couldn't win. But this could work." "It will work," Thompson interjected. "Ghost doesn't plan operations that fail." By noon, the barn had become a command center. Vendors coordinated delivery schedules to ensure no one worked alone. Local ham radio operators established secure communication networks. Former military veterans in the community stepped forward, offering skills and experience. Chen's voice crackled over the comms. "Ghost, Steel Wolves are moving. Multiple vehicles heading toward the market." "Right on schedule." John checked his watch. They're responding to the pressure. Sheriff? Hayes nodded, already on his radio. State Police Tactical Unit is standing by, just waiting for solid evidence. They'll have it, John assured him. Vendors in position? Sarah's voice came through clear. Market teams are ready. Everyone knows their roles. John surveyed the impromptu forces assembled in his barn. Farmers, teachers, small business owners, ordinary people pushed too far, now ready to fight back. The Steel Wolves had made a critical mistake. They'd thought they were taking over a market. Instead, they'd attacked a community. Remember, John addressed the group one final time, we're not just defending stands or profits. We're fighting for our homes, our way of life. The Steel Wolves think we're weak because we're peaceful. Time to show them the strength of united community. The vendors dispersed to their positions, each carrying a piece of the larger plan. What had started as individual acts of resistance was now a coordinated campaign. The Steel Wolves were about to learn that they hadn't just provoked a retired force recon operator, they'd awakened an entire community's fighting spirit. Ghost, Martinez called from his observation post. Multiple Steel Wolves chapters mobilizing. This is going to get hot. Good, John checked his tactical display one final time. Let them come in force. The harder they hit, the harder they'll fall. The market became a hive of coordinated activity. Vendors who'd once lived in fear now moved with purpose, each action part of a larger strategy. The Steel Wolves had built their power on intimidation and isolation. They weren't prepared for a community that refused to be divided. As evening approached, John received confirmation from his network of observers. The Steel Wolves were gathering their forces, preparing for a show of strength. They thought they were facing a simple rebellion. Instead, they were walking into a trap laid by a force recon veteran and supported by an entire community. All units, John broadcast on the secure channel. Operation Market Garden is now active. Remember your training? Remember what we're fighting for? These thugs want to play at being warriors. Let's show them what real strength looks like. John Mason's farm had become a fortress. Not the obvious kind with walls and guards, but something far more sophisticated. Hidden cameras covered every approach, motion sensors monitored the perimeter, and carefully concealed defensive positions dotted the property. 2 decades of force recon experience had taught him how to turn any location into a hardened position. Sarah Bennett wasn't the only vendor taking refuge here now. The Thompson family, after their stand was vandalized, had moved into the converted barn. The Wilsons occupied the guest house after receiving explicit threats. Each family brought their own stories of Steel Wolves' intimidation. Each confirmed John's assessment of the escalating situation. Perimeter sensors just picked up movement, Chen reported from the command center in the basement. 3 vehicles approaching from the North Road. John checked the surveillance feeds. Steel Wolves? Negative. Local police escort. It's the Rodriguez family. Their shop was hit an hour ago. The Rodriguez family, Maria, her husband Carlos, and their teenage son, arrived with only what they could carry. Their bakery stand had been a market fixture for 15 years. Now it was a smoldering ruin, another message from the Steel Wolves. They came at closing, Maria explained, her voice shaking. Said it was our last warning. When we refused to pay, they just started breaking everything. John led them to prepared rooms in the main house. His farm had been designed for this: multiple escape routes, hardened safe rooms, stockpiles of supplies. What looked like ordinary agricultural equipment concealed a sophisticated defensive infrastructure. Martinez, status report, John keyed his comm. 3 more families incoming. Steel Wolves are escalating, hitting soft targets. They're trying to force a confrontation. Good, John thought. Let them get aggressive. Every act of violence, every threat documented, built the case they'd need later. The Steel Wolves thought they were breaking spirits. Instead, they were providing evidence of their own destruction. Thompson's voice crackled over the secure channel. Ghost? You need to see this. Drone footage of their compound shows they're moving in heavy weapons. This isn't street gang hardware anymore. In the command center, John studied the thermal imaging feeds. The Steel Wolves were transforming their base into an armed camp. Military-grade weapons, professional security setup, organized defensive positions. They were preparing for war. "They still think they're the hunters," John muttered, making tactical notes. "Let them fortify. Stronger positions just mean bigger targets." Sarah found him later that evening, checking the farm's defensive preparations. "John, these families, they're terrified. The Steel Wolves seemed unstoppable before, but now, they're not unstoppable." John's voice carried absolute certainty. "They're predictable. Escalating violence is all they know, but violence without strategy is just noise." The night brought more refugees, more stories of intimidation and destruction. Each family was processed, housed, and integrated into the farm's security protocols. What had started as a safe house was becoming a resistance headquarters. "Ghost," Chen called from his monitoring station. "Intercepted communications suggest they're planning something big. Multiple chapters coordinating, heavy weapons being moved." John nodded, unsurprised. "They think they can shock us into submission. Time to show them what real combat veterans can do." The farm's defensive preparations shifted into high gear. Thompson established sniper positions covering every approach. Martinez rigged the perimeter with sensors and non-lethal deterrents. Every family was trained in basic security protocols, escape routes, and emergency procedures. "Remember," John addressed the gathered refugees, "this isn't just about survival. We're building something here, a community that refuses to be victimized. The Steel Wolves think fear is their weapon. We'll show them that unity is stronger." Late that night, standing watch over his transformed property, John reflected on the situation's irony. He'd bought this farm seeking peace after decades of combat. Now it had become a fortress again, sheltering civilians from a different kind of war. Max growled softly beside him, ears perking toward distant motorcycle engines. The Steel Wolves were out there, circling, testing. They thought they were tightening the noose. Instead, they were walking into a trap laid by one of the most experienced combat operators alive. "Let them come," John whispered, checking his tactical displays one final time. The Steel Wolves had chosen this fight, thinking they were targeting simple farmers. They were about to learn why some men earned names like Ghost in the world's deadliest combat zones. The farm stood quiet under the Montana stars, its defenses invisible but lethal, its occupants scared but resolute. The Steel Wolves thought they were laying siege to a safe house. Instead, they were surrounding themselves with a kill zone designed by a Force Recon veteran who'd spent his career hunting more dangerous prey than them. "Keep your hands up," John instructed, demonstrating the proper defensive stance. "Combat isn't about strength. It's about position, leverage, and will." 20 vendors stood in formation on his barn's converted floor, now a makeshift training area. Each had chosen to stay and fight, rather than flee. The morning sun filtered through high windows, illuminating determined faces as they mimicked his movements. Sarah, sporting fresh bruises from her Steel Wolves encounter, picked up the techniques quickly. Her background in college athletics gave her an advantage in body control and balance. "Like this?" she asked, executing a perfect defensive shift. "Exactly," John approved. "Remember, they expect victims, not fighters. Your first advantage is surprise." Martinez worked the other end of the barn, teaching basic tactical movement. "Stay low, use cover, never move in straight lines. Make yourself a hard target." The training had begun 3 days ago after the Steel Wolves' first major assault on the market. John had modified Force Recon techniques for civilian use, focusing on survival skills and defensive tactics. These weren't soldiers, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to stay alive long enough for his plan to work. "Communications check," Chen called from his station. Each vendor activated their concealed radio, part of a secure network that covered the entire market area. Technology that had once coordinated special operations missions now protected farmers and craftsmen. "They're watching," Thompson reported from his observation post. "Steel wolves have increased surveillance. They know something's changing." Good, John thought. Let them watch. Let them see farmers moving with new confidence, vendors working in coordinated patterns. Plant the seeds of doubt in their minds. "Focus," he called to his students. "Remember, they rely on fear and surprise. Take those away, you take their power. Work together, trust your training, follow the plan." The afternoon brought advanced lessons: emergency medical care from Doc, counter-surveillance from Martinez, basic self-defense from John. Each skill carefully chosen, each lesson building toward a larger strategy. "Ghost," Chen's voice crackled over the command channel. "Movement at their compound. They're mobilizing." "Right on schedule," John checked his watch. "They're responding to the change. Thompson?" "Got eyes on their approach. 3 vehicles, heavily armed, looking for a show of force." John gathered his trainees. "Remember what we discussed. No heroics, no direct confrontation. Use your training, work your roles, show them something unexpected." The Steel Wolves arrived at the market in force, expecting to find scared vendors. Instead, they encountered something new: coordinated movement, confident stances, people who met their eyes without flinching. "The hell?" one enforcer muttered, watching Sarah smoothly redirect her flower stand's customers away from their approach path. "These ain't the same farmers." John watched from his position, evaluating his students' performance. The vendors moved with purpose now, implementing their training. Simple things: maintaining situational awareness, using buddy systems, keeping escape routes clear. But together, they painted a picture that clearly unsettled the Steel Wolves. "They're pulling back," Thompson reported. "Looks confused. This wasn't in their playbook." By evening, the market was buzzing with quiet confidence. The day's encounters had proven the training's value. These weren't helpless victims anymore. They were becoming a coordinated force. "Next phase begins tomorrow," John informed his core team. "The Steel Wolves think they're seeing civilian resistance. Time to show them what happens when they face trained opponents." In his command center, John reviewed surveillance footage of the day's events. The Steel Wolves' body language told the story: growing uncertainty, confusion at their tactics' ineffectiveness. They'd expected submission. Instead, they'd encountered capability. "Ghost," Martinez called from his post, "intercepted their communications. They're calling in reinforcements, getting nervous." Perfect, John thought. Let them escalate. Every move they made followed his predicted pattern, setting up the final confrontation. The Steel Wolves thought they were dealing with an organized resistance. They were about to learn they were dealing with something far more dangerous: a Force Recon veteran who'd spent his career teaching others how to hunt wolves in the dark. John Mason moved through the shadows of the Steel Wolves' compound like a ghost, his movements silent and precise. 2 decades of Force Recon operations had taught him how to become invisible, how to move through enemy territory undetected. Max remained at the farm, the German shepherd's presence too risky for this mission. Chen's voice whispered in his earpiece, "Guards changing in 30 seconds. East entrance will be clear." The compound's security was professional, but predictable. John had spent a week studying their patterns, identifying the gaps in their coverage. Now he exploited those weaknesses with surgical precision. "I'm in," he breathed, slipping through a maintenance door. The interior was dark, illuminated only by security lights. Perfect conditions for someone trained in night operations. His objective was the compound's command center. Intelligence suggested the Steel Wolves kept their operational data there: shipping manifests, contact lists, evidence of their entire criminal network. But more importantly, it would give him access to their communications infrastructure. "Two guards approaching your position," Thompson warned from his overwatch position, holding pattern consistent with their routine. John melted into an alcove, his dark clothing blending with the shadows. The guards passed within feet of his position, their conversation focused on the day's events at the market. "Those farmers ain't acting right," one muttered. "Something's changed." "Bull's bringing in heavy hitters," the other replied. "End it quick." Once they passed, John moved deeper into the compound. The layout matched the blueprints Chen had acquired: 3 levels, central command center, multiple escape routes. He placed tiny surveillance devices at key intersections, each feeding data back to his command post. The command center's security was substantial: keycard access, camera coverage, armed guards. But John hadn't spent 20 years in special operations without learning a few tricks. "System accessing now," Chen reported. The security panel blinked green. Inside, John worked quickly. Surveillance devices planted in corners, data taps installed on their servers, trackers attached to key equipment. Everything they would need for the next phase. "Company," Martinez warned. 3 targets approaching from the south corridor. John finished his work and moved to his exit route. The infiltration had taken less than 15 minutes, in and out without a trace, just like countless missions before. Back at his command post, the team reviewed the operation's results. The Steel Wolves' entire infrastructure was now compromised, their every move monitored, their communications intercepted. "They're planning something big," Chen reported, analyzing the data. "Multiple chapters converging, heavy weapons being moved. They're treating this like a war." "Good," John replied, studying the tactical display. "Let them come prepared. The harder they hit, the harder they'll fall." The Steel Wolves were about to learn why some enemies were called ghosts, not because they couldn't be seen, but because by the time you spotted them, it was already too late. The truck carrying the Steel Wolves' latest shipment never reached its destination. One moment it was cruising down a dark county road, the next it was sitting disabled, its engine mysteriously dead. The driver found himself staring into the darkness as shadowy figures emerged from the tree line, moving with the fluid precision that marked professional operators. "Clear," Thompson's voice came over the secure channel as his team secured the vehicle. "Drivers contained, cargo intact." The cargo hold revealed exactly what John had expected: military-grade weapons, packaged drugs, and detailed distribution plans. All carefully documented, all perfect evidence for what was to come. In his command center, John watched the operation unfold through multiple camera feeds. This was just the first strike of the night. Across the county, similar operations were underway, each target carefully chosen, each strike precisely timed to create maximum disruption with minimum trace of who was responsible. "Team 2 reporting," Martinez's voice crackled over the comm. "Safe house clear. Found their financial records. Ghost, this is bigger than we thought. They're setting up distribution hubs across 3 states, using the markets as cover for a major expansion." John studied the tactical display where red dots representing Steel Wolves' assets were going dark one by one. Not destroyed, that would be too obvious. Just compromised, made unusable. Each strike calculated to erode their infrastructure while avoiding direct confrontation. "Chen, status on their communications?" "Total chaos," Chen reported from his monitoring station. "They can't figure out if it's law enforcement, rival gangs, or something else. Their encryption's compromised, command structures in disarray. Bulls ordered all operations suspended until they can identify the threat." Perfect. The Steel Wolves had built their power on intimidation and violence, tools that were useless against an enemy they couldn't see or fight. John had spent his career teaching Force Recon teams how to dismantle larger organizations, start with their supply lines, then their communications, then their safe houses. create confusion, paranoia, internal distrust. "Ghost," Thompson called in. "Found something interesting in the truck's manifest. They're moving serious hardware, military-grade stuff, way beyond typical gang equipment." "Document everything," John ordered. "We're not just disrupting their operation. We're building a case that not even their political connections can bury." By midnight, 3 more Steel Wolves supply lines had been cut. Teams of local veterans, trained by John over the past weeks, executed precision strikes on storage facilities. No violence, no confrontation, just quick professional operations that left the gang's infrastructure in shambles. "Listen to this," Chen played an intercepted call. Bull's voice was tight with rage. "Find out who's hitting us. Nobody moves product until we know what we're dealing with." "They're pulling back to their main compound," Martinez reported, "consolidating forces, increasing security, getting paranoid." John allowed himself a small smile. The Steel Wolves were learning a lesson he'd taught to insurgents and warlords across the globe. Sometimes the deadliest attacks were the ones you never saw coming. "Team 4 reporting," another voice joined the channel. "Target secure. You need to see what we found, Ghost. Detailed plans for their entire operation. Distribution routes, corrupt officials, cartel connections, everything." Dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. In just one night, the Steel Wolves' carefully built criminal empire had been systematically dismantled. Their supply lines were cut, their safe houses compromised, their communications in chaos, and they still had no idea who was responsible. "All teams initiate Phase 2, John broadcast. Plant the surveillance packages, then withdraw. Remember, we're not just hitting their infrastructure. We're gathering evidence for what comes next." The night's operations had confirmed his suspicions. The Steel Wolves weren't just a gang, they were an advance force for something bigger. Their market takeovers, their military-grade equipment, their political connections, all pointed to a larger organization moving into position. "Ghost," Chen's voice carried urgency, "intercepted orders from their leadership. They're calling in everything they've got. Multiple chapters mobilizing, heavy weapons being moved. They're treating this like a war." "Good," John replied, studying the tactical display showing enemy movements. "Let them come prepared. Let them bring everything they've got. The harder they hit, the harder they'll fall." He switched to the command channel. "All units, mission accomplished. Fall back to designated positions. Prepare for Phase 3. As his teams withdrew into the pre-dawn darkness, John reviewed the night's achievements. The Steel Wolves were about to learn why some enemies were called ghosts. Not because they couldn't be seen, but because by the time you spotted them, it was already too late. In their compound, the Steel Wolves' leadership scrambled to understand what was happening. They had faced rival gangs, law enforcement, even military operations. But this was different. This was systematic, professional, precise. This was an enemy that struck without being seen, that destroyed without engaging, that hunted from the shadows. They were about to discover they weren't dealing with ordinary opponents. They were facing a Force Recon veteran who'd spent his career teaching others how to hunt wolves in the dark. And the night's operations were just the beginning. Bull slammed his fist on the command center table, surveillance screens flickering with static. 3 warehouses hit, 6 safe houses compromised, supply lines cut. Who the hell are we dealing with? The Steel Wolves compound had transformed into an armed camp. Heavy weapons positioned at every entrance, reinforced positions on the roof, patrols doubled. Professional mercenaries moved among the gang members, their military training evident in their bearing. "Ghost, movement at the north entrance," Chen reported through John's earpiece. 4 SUVs arriving. Looks like they're reinforcements. John watched through his scope as men in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles. Ex-military contractors, probably Blackwater or similar. The Steel Wolves were done playing games. "They've changed their patrol patterns," Thompson observed from his position. "Professional setup now. These aren't street thugs anymore." Within hours, motorcycle convoys began arriving from neighboring states. The Steel Wolves were gathering their forces, preparing for all-out war. What had started as a simple protection racket was escalating into something much larger. Intercepted communication suggests they're planning a major offensive, Chen reported. Multiple targets, coordinated strikes. They're going to hit everyone who's resisted them. John studied the tactical display in his command center. The Steel Wolves had tripled their numbers overnight, bringing in experienced fighters and heavy weapons. They thought overwhelming force would give them the advantage. Sarah's team in position? John asked, checking the market's defensive preparations. Affirmative, Martinez replied. Vendors are ready, surveillance network active. They won't catch us by surprise. The first attack came at dawn. 3 tactical teams hit outlying farms, expecting to find soft targets. Instead, they encountered prepared positions and coordinated resistance. John's training had transformed simple farmers into a capable defensive force. Ghost, they're pulling back, Thompson reported. 2 casualties on their side, no injuries on ours. The Steel Wolves responded with escalating violence. Drive-by shootings, attempted arsons, coordinated intimidation. But each attack met the same result: prepared defenders, coordinated responses, and mounting casualties among the attackers. They're getting desperate, Martinez observed, making mistakes. This isn't going according to their playbook. In his command center, John monitored the situation through multiple feeds. The Steel Wolves had brought in serious firepower, military-grade weapons, professional operators, everything they had. But they were fighting the wrong war. They thought this was about force. It was about intelligence, preparation, and will. All units hold positions, John broadcast. Let them wear themselves out. Every failed attack weakens them. Every casualty reduces their effectiveness. By nightfall, the Steel Wolves had launched 6 major operations, each one carefully documented, each failure adding to their growing frustration. They weren't just losing men and resources, they were losing their aura of invincibility. Ghost, Chen's voice carried urgency. New orders intercepted. Bulls calling in everything they've got. Full assault plan for tomorrow. Perfect, John replied, studying the tactical display. Let them commit everything. The harder they hit, the harder they'll fall. In the market's hidden command center, John briefed his team. The Steel Wolves thought they were preparing for a decisive battle. Instead, they were walking into a trap, years in the making. Remember, he told his operators, they're fighting the wrong war. They think this is about territory and intimidation. Show them what happens when they face real warriors. As night fell over the county, both sides prepared for what was coming. The Steel Wolves gathered their forces, confident that superior numbers and firepower would prevail. They had no idea they were facing a Force Recon veteran who'd spent his career teaching others how to hunt wolves in the dark. The final battle was approaching, but it wouldn't be fought on the Steel Wolves' terms. John Mason hadn't survived 2 decades of special operations by fighting fair. Tomorrow, the gang would learn why some men earned names like Ghost in the world's deadliest combat zones. John Mason spread tactical maps across his command center table. His team gathered around. They'll hit 3 points simultaneously, he indicated key positions. Main force through the market's front entrance, secondary teams from the east and west. Thompson studied the terrain through satellite imagery. Perfect kill zones. We can funnel them right where we want them. Police standing by, Sheriff Hayes confirmed. State tactical unit ready to move on our signal. Just need solid evidence of criminal activity. John activated the tactical display, showing Steel Wolves' positions in red. Chen, status? Surveillance network active. Every approach covered. Their communications compromised. We'll know their moves before they make them. Martinez pointed to defensive positions. Local veterans in place. Market vendors armed and trained. Medical teams standing by. Remember, John addressed his team, this isn't about body count. We're building a case. Every action documented, every response recorded. When this is done, there won't be any political protection left." The tactical plan was precise. Let the Steel Wolves commit their forces, document their illegal activities, then spring the trap. State police would move in with federal backup, catching them in the act. "Ghost," Chen called out. "Movement at their compound. They're mobilizing everything." "Right on schedule." John checked his watch. "All units, final positions. Remember your training. Let them think they have the advantage." Sarah coordinated the market's civilian response teams. Medical supplies distributed. Escape routes clear. Everyone knows their roles. John studied the tactical display one final time. The Steel Wolves were gathering their forces, preparing for what they thought would be a decisive battle. Instead, they were walking into a carefully prepared kill zone. "This ends tomorrow," he told his team. "Show them the difference between thugs who practice violence and warriors who've mastered it." As night fell, both sides made final preparations. The Steel Wolves thought superior numbers would give them victory. They were about to learn why Force Recon operators were considered the deadliest hunters in the world. The first shots came at dawn. Steel Wolves' motorcycles roared into the market square, riders armed with military-grade weapons. Their confidence lasted exactly 3 seconds, until they hit John's first defensive line. "Contact front," Thompson's voice crackled over the comm. "Multiple targets entering Kill Zone Alpha." Concealed barriers channeled the attackers exactly where John wanted them. His trained vendors moved with practiced precision, falling back to prepared positions. The Steel Wolves thought they were pursuing fleeing civilians. Instead, they were being funneled into a trap. "Second wave incoming," Chen reported from his surveillance post. "Heavy vehicles, armed contractors, they're committing everything." Bull led the main assault personally, his massive frame armored like a tank. "Burn it all!" His voice boomed across the market. "Show them what happens to people who resist." John watched from his command position as the Steel Wolves advanced. Their tactics were professional but predictable. They'd fallen for the oldest trap in warfare, assuming their enemy was weaker, less prepared. "All units, execute Phase 2, John broadcast. The market's seemingly abandoned stands suddenly bristled with defensive positions. Local veterans, trained by John, opened fire with non-lethal rounds. The Steel Wolves found themselves caught in interlocking fields of fire. "Ghost, they're trying to flank east," Martinez warned. "Let them," John replied calmly. That approach led straight into Thompson's prepared kill zone. The sniper had spent days setting up his positions, ensuring maximum coverage with minimum risk. The battle transformed the market into chaos. Steel Wolves fighters found their weapons mysteriously jamming, their communications filled with static, their planned routes blocked by obstacles that hadn't been there hours before. "Police teams moving in," Sheriff Hayes reported. "All approaches covered. We're documenting everything." John's strategy was working perfectly. The Steel Wolves had committed their entire force, their illegal weapons and activities clearly recorded. Each defensive position had multiple cameras, building an irrefutable case. Bulls losing control, Chen intercepted their communications. Groups breaking formation, taking independent action. Exactly as planned, John had designed the defense to split their forces, isolate their leaders, create confusion. The same tactics he'd used against insurgents were now dismantling a criminal empire. "Ghost, they're pulling back," Thompson reported. "Heavy casualties from non-lethal fire. Their professional contractors are refusing to advance." The Steel Wolves' attack had lasted less than an hour. They retreated in disorder, leaving behind weapons, equipment, and any pretense of invincibility. Their aura of fear was broken. "All units, maintain positions," John ordered. "They'll try one more push. Let them come. Every move is documented, every action recorded." The market stood firm, its defenders watching the retreating gang. The Steel Wolves had brought overwhelming force to what they thought would be an easy victory. Instead, They'd been systematically dismantled by a force recon veteran who'd spent his career teaching others how to hunt predators in the dark. The siege had become a trap, and the wolves had walked right into it. The Steel Wolves struck at midnight, targeting John Mason's farm. 3 tactical teams breached the perimeter, expecting to find a simple farmhouse. Instead, they encountered a fortress. "Multiple contacts, north fence," Chen reported from the command bunker. "Thermal shows 12 hostiles." Motion sensors triggered automated defenses, lights, alarms, and non-lethal deterrents that sent the first team scrambling for cover. They'd walked straight into prepared fields of fire. "Thompson, status?" John's voice was calm in the darkness. 3 teams pinned down. Their night vision's useless. IR floods are working perfectly. Bull led the second wave personally, bringing in heavy weapons and professional contractors. They moved with military precision, but John had designed his defenses against far more dangerous opponents. "Execute dagger protocol," John ordered. Underground sprinklers activated, but instead of water, they sprayed a chemical mixture that rendered tear gas inert. The Steel Wolves' tactical advantage disappeared in seconds. Martinez's voice crackled. "Ghost, they're deploying shaped charges on the barn door?" "Let them breach," John replied. The barn was a prepared kill box, rigged with cameras to document every illegal action. The explosion rocked the night. Steel Wolves' tactical teams stormed through the smoke, only to find themselves caught in crossfire. Every angle covered, every approach monitored. "Police teams moving in," Sheriff Hayes reported. "All exits blocked. We've got them documented using military explosives." The battle shifted as the Steel Wolves realized their mistake. They weren't attacking a farmer. They were assaulting a position prepared by a force recon veteran. "Ghost, Bull's calling for backup." Chen intercepted their communications. "No response. Their support teams are still tied down at the market." John watched through thermal imaging as the attackers' formation crumbled. Their professional contractors recognized the trap first, breaking off their assault. The remaining gang members found themselves caught between police blockades and prepared defensive positions. "All units execute final phase," John broadcast. Floodlights snapped on, illuminating the entire property. Police helicopters appeared overhead, their spotlights pinning down the remaining attackers. The Steel Wolves' counterattack had lasted 30 minutes. They retreated in chaos, leaving behind weapons, equipment, and any illusion of their invincibility. Bull's voice raged over their compromised radio. "Fall back! Full retreat!" But there was nowhere to run. Every escape route led to police checkpoints. Every action had been recorded, every illegal weapon documented. The night ended with multiple arrests. The Steel Wolves had tried to eliminate a threat, only to walk into a trap laid by one of the most experienced combat operators alive. Bull faced a rebellion in his own compound. The Steel Wolves' leadership had gathered for an emergency meeting, and the tension was explosive. 2 failed attacks. Snake, his second in command, slammed his fist on the table. "Half our men arrested, equipment seized, safe houses compromised. We're done here." "Nobody's done until I say," Bull growled, but his authority was crumbling. The night's disasters had shaken the gang's confidence. "Ghost," Chen reported through encrypted channels. "Their command structure's falling apart. Internal communications show multiple factions forming." John watched through surveillance feeds as the Steel Wolves turned on each other. His strategy had worked perfectly, pressure from outside, creating chaos within. "They're splitting into 3 groups, Thompson observed from his position. Bull's loyalists, Snake's faction, and the professional contractors who want out. The mercenaries were the first to break. Their commander, a former Special Forces operator, recognized a losing situation. "We're done. This isn't what we signed up for." "Ghost," Martinez called. Police intercepted multiple vehicles leaving the compound. Their outer defense positions are abandoned. John's plan had targeted the gang's weakest point, their unity. Under pressure, their alliance of convenience was shattering. Snake made his move at dawn, leading half the remaining members in a mass exodus. "This is on you, Bull. You pushed too hard too fast. Now we're at war with a ghost." Bull's authority collapsed within hours. His remaining loyalists, faced with mounting evidence and police pressure, began negotiating surrenders. "All units hold position," John ordered. "Let them implode. Document everything." The Steel Wolves' breaking point had come not from direct confrontation, but from the psychological warfare John had waged. They'd been defeated not by force, but by fear, doubt, and internal division. "Police moving in," Sheriff Hayes reported. "Bull's requesting terms. It's over, Ghost." John watched as the once mighty gang disintegrated. They'd brought overwhelming force, professional fighters, and military hardware. But they'd never faced an enemy trained in psychological operations, in turning an organization against itself. The Steel Wolves had finally learned why some enemies were called ghosts. By the time you saw them, it was already too late. State police tactical teams breached the Steel Wolves compound at dawn. They found minimal resistance. Most members had already fled or surrendered. "Command center secure," the tactical leader reported. "Evidence intact. Documentation of their entire operation." John watched from his surveillance position as Bull was led out in handcuffs. The gang leader's massive frame seemed diminished now, his aura of invincibility shattered. "Final numbers," Chen reported. 38 arrests, including their entire leadership. Weapons cache seized, financial records secured, distribution network documented. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage showed illegal weapons transfers, drug shipments, explicit threats. The Steel Wolves' political connections couldn't bury this. "FBI's taking over," Sheriff Hayes confirmed. "Federal charges incoming. Their whole network's exposed." Thompson's voice came through. "Cartel connections confirmed. This goes way beyond local crime. They were setting up a major distribution hub." The market vendors gathered to watch as police vehicles filled the compound. Sarah stood beside John, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "Hard to believe it's over," she said softly. "Not quite," John replied. "Still got cleanup to do. Make sure they can't rebuild." Martinez coordinated with federal agents, sharing intelligence from their surveillance operation. The evidence they'd gathered would dismantle not just the local chapter, but the entire regional network. "Ghost," Chen called, intercepted their last communications. Other chapters are going dark, trying to distance themselves. The whole organization's collapsing. John's strategy had worked perfectly. By documenting everything, building an irrefutable case, they'd eliminated any possibility of the gang rebuilding. The fall of the Steel Wolves sent shockwaves through criminal networks across the region. The message was clear. Some targets were better left alone. As federal agents processed the scene, John stood with his team, watching their operation's culmination. The Steel Wolves had brought violence and intimidation to his community. He'd responded with precision, intelligence, and strategic warfare. "All units stand down," he broadcast finally. "Operation complete." The war was over. The wolves had been hunted in their own den, defeated not by brute force, but by a ghost who'd mastered the art of invisible warfare. "Cleanup operations complete," Martinez reported 1 week after the Steel Wolves' fall. "All safe houses cleared, surveillance equipment recovered, defensive positions dismantled." John reviewed the final reports in his command center. The operation had been comprehensive. No loose ends, no opportunities for the gang to rebuild. "Federal indictments coming down," Sheriff Hayes confirmed. 43 members charged, including their political connections. Nobody's walking away from this. The market was returning to normal, though changes remained. Vendors moved with new confidence, worked in coordinated patterns. John's training had transformed them from victims into a community capable of defending itself. Ghost, Chen called. Final intelligence assessment. Their entire regional networks collapsed, other chapters disbanding, trying to avoid federal attention. The evidence they'd gathered proved devastating. Financial records exposed corruption reaching into state government. Surveillance footage documented illegal weapons transfers, drug distribution, explicit threats. The Steel Wolves' political protection crumbled under federal scrutiny. Found something interesting, Thompson reported. Their records show they were testing our defenses for months before moving in. They knew something was different about this market. Sarah organized a community meeting to discuss security going forward. The vendors had learned valuable lessons about unity, preparation, and resistance. "We're not going back to being victims," she declared. "John showed us how to defend ourselves. That knowledge doesn't go away." John's military background was public knowledge now, though details remained classified. The community's respect had deepened with understanding of who had fought for them. "All elements reporting clear," Chen confirmed. "Operation officially concluded." The after-action review revealed a perfect operation. No civilian casualties, minimal property damage, comprehensive evidence collection. Force recon tactics adapted for civilian defense had proved devastatingly effective. "Future security protocols established," Martinez reported. "Community defense network operational. No one will find this an easy target again." John stood at his market stand, watching normal business resume. The wolves had been driven out, but more importantly, the sheep had learned to defend themselves. The ghost had completed his mission. The community would handle the rest. The market thrived under its new security measures. John Mason's training program had evolved into a permanent community defense network. Vendors maintained their tactical awareness, worked in coordinated teams, kept watch over their neighbors. "Security systems fully integrated," Chen reported. "Surveillance network automated. Early warning protocols active." John had adapted force recon techniques for civilian use, creating a sustainable defense system. Each vendor knew their role, maintained their sector, reported suspicious activity. "Training programs expanding," Martinez confirmed. "Other markets requesting help." Word spread about what happened here. The Steel Wolves' defeat had sent a message across the region. Criminal organizations avoided the area, recognizing a hardened target. The community's reputation for self-defense deterred potential threats. "Final security assessment complete," Thompson noted. "Defensive positions upgraded, escape routes maintained, communication protocols established." Sarah coordinated the civilian response teams. Regular drills kept skills sharp, maintained unit cohesion. The market had become a model for community protection. "State police using our methods," Sheriff Hayes reported. "Training other communities in organized resistance. Your system works, Ghost." John watched his legacy take shape. The market wasn't just secure, it was transforming other communities, teaching them to defend themselves, resist intimidation, maintain their freedom. "Ghost," Chen called. "Regional analysis shows significant drop in organized crime. Your tactics are spreading." The new beginning wasn't just about security, it was about community, unity, and the power of trained resistance against organized threats. Max patrolled beside John, the German Shepherd alert, as always. They'd helped create something lasting, a community that would never be victims again. The ghost had taught others to hunt wolves. His lessons would endure. 1 year after the Steel Wolves' fall, John Mason stood at his market stand arranging tomatoes with military precision. The morning frost crunched under his boots, reminding him of that first confrontation. Max lay nearby, alert as always, though his watch was more routine than tactical now. "Security sweep complete," Thompson reported through the discreet comm system that had become standard market equipment. "All sectors clear." The market had transformed. Vendors moved with quiet confidence, maintaining their tactical awareness while conducting business. Regular training kept their skills sharp, their defensive protocols active. Ghost, Chen called from the command center that now served multiple communities. Quarterly assessment finished. Crime rates down 80% across the region, your models being adopted nationwide. What had started as one farmer's stand against organized crime had become a blueprint for community defense. Other markets sent representatives to learn their methods, study their protocols, understand how ordinary citizens could protect themselves. Training programs expanded, Martinez confirmed. 200 communities using our system now. Steel Wolves' takedown became a case study in civilian resistance. Sarah approached John's stand, her flower shop thriving in the peace they'd created. "Sometimes it's hard to remember how it was before," she said. "The fear, the helplessness." "That's the point," John replied, checking his produce display. "Best victories are the ones where people forget they were ever victims." The market's success had attracted attention from law enforcement nationwide. Their combination of community organization, tactical training, and strategic defense had proven remarkably effective against organized crime. "Final statistics," Chen reported. "Zero criminal activity in our operational area this year. Complete deterrence achieved." John watched the morning crowd, seeing not just customers, but a community that had learned to defend itself. His Force Recon experience had found an unexpected application, teaching civilians to resist intimidation, maintain their freedom, protect their way of life. "Full circle," he muttered, Max's ears perking up at his tone. He'd bought this farm seeking peace after decades of combat. Instead, he'd found a different kind of mission, showing others how to create their own peace. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the market in shades of amber and gold. Vendors called greetings. Customers browsed displays. Children played between the stalls. Normal life, made possible by constant vigilance. "All sectors report normal," Thompson's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "Just another quiet day at the market." That was the real victory, John realized. Not the tactical success against the Steel Wolves, but this, a community that could maintain its own security, protect its own peace, ensure its own future. The Ghost had completed his mission, but John Mason, farmer and protector, had found his true purpose. Sometimes the best way to find peace was to teach others how to defend it. Max stretched and stood, ready for their morning patrol. Some habits never changed, nor should they. The price of freedom was eternal vigilance, but when a community stood together, that price became easier to bear. The market thrived under the Montana sun, its peace secured not by force of arms, but by unity of purpose. The wolves had been driven out, and in their place stood something stronger, a community that would never be victims again. John picked up a ripe tomato, checking its weight with practiced care. The skills that had once served him in combat now maintained a different kind of security. He'd come full circle, finding peace not in escape from his past, but in using it to protect others' futures. The Ghost could rest. The farmer had work to do.